Okay, so this is dedicatedly we are talking about the introduction to EKS. So EKS stands for Elastic Kubernetes Service. So what is this EKS? It is like a fully managed Kubernetes control plane. So here it is also one of the like the service that you can use to deploy the containers on AWS. But what is the difference between the ECS and EKSs? So EKS is basically utilizes the Kubernetes at the backend. So what is this Kubernetes? So Kubernetes is like the container orchestration technology. So basically, Kubernetes gives you a feature to deploy your containers, scale your containers. It has a self-healing option, and it can replace unhealthy containers. And it is like an open source project. So EKS, so Kubernetes is an open source project, right? And you can use it for free. But with EKS, what they have done is, so with EKS, you need to have one master node and the several worker nodes. So here, if you are using EKS, that orchestration means the management of the master node is completely taken care by the AWS so that you can specifically focus on your application development part. So EKS is managing your like AWS is managing your control plane, your master worker nodes means installing the installing the Kubernetes on them and make sure that it is using the EKS optimized AMI and many other options. So that's the main advantage of having the EKS. So basically, direct exposes an endpoint with which your worker nodes can use that endpoint and join your EKS cluster. Okay. So if I told you, like, if I let me show you the demo. But before the demo, let me show you one more thing also. So if I go here, so what is this EKS? So let me give you one more insights on this. So let me talk about what is Kubernetes. So basically, it is an open source container management platform, helps you to run container at scale, and basically, it's like more. It's been here in the market for almost a decade now. And that machines that makes up the Kubernetes are called nodes. So nodes in Kubernetes cluster may be physical or virtual. There are two types of node. So first one is the control plane, which indicates your like a brain of the cluster. So all the scaling decisions, all the scaling up, scaling down, pod deployment. So in terms of Kubernetes, we called containers as pods. Okay, and we have the worker nodes. So basically, worker nodes are responsible for running your pods. Okay, and those pods will be using an image which can be from Docker Hub only. So Kubernetes objects are entities that represents the state of the cluster. So Kubernetes is always working to make sure the current state is equal to the desired state. For example, if any two pods got terminated due to some unhealthy status, so Kubernetes will make sure that it will launch two extra pods to make sure that any number, the desired state is always be maintained. Okay, and we have the pod means like in ECS we have tasks, in Kubernetes we have pods. Daemon side is that particular pod which runs on every particular worker node in the cluster. Deployment is basically, what is deployment? So deployment is basically like the managing all the pods at once. So you can have one single deployment which is managing the n number of pods, just like the ECS service which is managing the n number of tasks. So we have a replica set defined. In replica set, we can define how many number of pods should be always running. What is a job? So job pod properly runs to completion. That is a job, and you can also define key pair service to your particular Kubernetes. So if we talk about the Kubernetes architecture, so basically this is a control plane. Control plane, we have the API server, we have a scheduler, we have a controller manager, we have the S3 database. So this API server is responsible for everything. Every component in the cluster will be talking to this API server, which is responsible for making the any decision in your EKS cluster, a Kubernetes cluster. This kubelet is the agent that runs on each worker node, and this communication between your worker node and the control plane is happening by this kubelet. So this kubelet is repeatedly sending the status of your pods to this particular API server, and then API server uses the controller manager to make the scaling decisions, and all the configuration of your cluster is stored inside this HCD database. Okay, this kube proxy is responsible for all the networking properties inside a worker node. Okay, so yep, that's all about the architectural overview of Kubernetes and how it works. And yep, so as I told you, we have a control plane, we have the HCD scheduler. Scheduler is make sure that where to schedule a pods on which worker node based on the pod CPU memory requirements and other things factor as well. Next, we have the data plane. Data plane means your worker node. So you have the kubelet which is running on every worker node inside your EKS cluster. So this kubelet is also, as I just told you, this is constantly posting the status of your pods to the API server, and this kube proxy is responsible for all the networking configuration. Means when the request is coming to your pods, so we need to send that particular request to which pod. So yep, that's it for the Kubernetes introduction. And the next lecture we're gonna see the demo part. Thank you.